Good evening. May we please take a moment to silence all cell phones? To start, we are welcoming Carl Moore to the stage. He is part of the Hopi tribe, Chinawalve, and he will be performing a prayer song to start.
All right, good evening, relatives. It is good to be here, and it's good to be with awesome people. I'm going to start this by singing a prayer song. I feel it appropriate, since we're on indigenous land, to sing an indigenous song, and also recognize the indigenous animals and plants and water that is here that you all are hopefully fighting for, and I appreciate that about you all. Wakan tonka toka hea Chai waki ailo ai mitaku yeo wanik tacha toka hea Chai waki ailo Tonka Shaila Toka Hea Che Woki Elo Ai Mitaku Yeo Wanik Tacha Toka Hea Chai Woki Elo Wakan Tonka Toka Hea Chai Woki Elo ai mitaku yeo wanik tacha toka hea chai woki elo tonka shaila Toka hea Che woki elo ai mitaku yeo wanik tacha toka hea Chai woki elo ha mataki asen.
Thank you, Carl. That was beautiful. Thank you for attending this public forum. My name is Josh Harvey, and on behalf of all of the booksellers at the King's English Bookshop, we welcome everyone attending in person and virtually. Thank you to the Salt Lake Main Library for hosting and platforming this public forum. We recognize and acknowledge that we reside in the ancestral homeland of the Ute Indian Tribe, Goshute Indian Tribe, Navajo Nation, Paiute Indian Tribe, and Shoshone Nation. The Great Salt Lake has cultural significance and a rich history among these nations. A bit of background for tonight's event. On Monday, May 4th, Box Elder County Commissioners approved the Stratos Data Center in Hansel Valley. Construction of the hyperscale data center will be located on the Salt Flats west of Tremonton. The King's English Bookshop implores you to keep reading and to talk about these issues with your constituents. That is why we are sponsoring this event. On our website, there is a list of works by brilliant authors who have written on the Great Salt Lake, Western water laws, AI, and environmental justice. The Great Salt Lake has been continuously desiccating as a result of evaporation of the terminal lake and redirecting water from flowing to the lake. The hyperscale campus will develop up to 41,200 acres of land, reported to require 7 to 9 gigawatts of energy for the data center annually. The project's developers have been promised major tax breaks, and still, we have yet to see any project plans, environmental impact studies, or independent assessments to corroborate the claims of sustainability. If Stratos Project goes forward at the scale initially specified, it will negatively impact the Great Salt Lake, average temperatures, and local air quality. This forum is a step towards broadening the conversation and placing it in the hands of the public. Thank you for being here. I will now turn it over to Addison Graham to introduce our panelists.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us. As our panelists take their seat, I'll go ahead and introduce them to you. We're very lucky that they all carved out some time for us this evening. To my right is Brenna Williams, who comes from Box Elder County. We considered busing her down here for this event, but we decided we didn't want to give Mr. Wonderful any ammunition, so she drove herself. I want to make that clear. Brenna is actually she's sponsoring the citizens referendum up in Box Elder County, and we're very grateful that she took this time to speak to us this evening. We have Ben Abbott, who is an ecologist at Brigham Young University and executive director of Grow the Flow. Josh Kraft is the Director of Government Relations and Public Affairs at Utah Clean Energy, and Brig Daniels teaches environmental law at the University of Utah, where he is the co-director at the Wallace Stegner Center for Land Resources and the Environment, and where he also heads up the Great Salt Lake Project. Give them all a round of applause. You may notice we have one empty seat. We had one panelist with a personal emergency that came up, so we hope he'll be able to join us next time. I'm going to start by asking each of the panelists just one question. They'll respond to those questions, and then we're going to have some microphones roaming in the audience. As this is a public forum, we want to make sure we give you guys plenty of time to ask your questions. So we'll jump right in. Ben, my first question is for you. We've had a lot of questions pour in online about water. How much water is going to be used in this project, and what aspects of the project will that water be tied up in? You've gone on the record and said you're not categorically against all data centers, but that this is a different beast. Why is that, and how could water use in this project affect the Great Salt Lake?
Thank you, Addison, and thanks everyone for being here. This is a community event, and it's beautiful to see that power. I have a non-rhetorical question. What percentage of current water use in the Great Salt Lake watershed is going to data centers? And what I'll do is, you can raise your hand if you say under 1%, 5%, 25%, 50%, above 50%. So the answer is currently far under 1% of our water is going to data centers. The water is going toward outdoor irrigation, right? Lawns and agricultural fields. So the decline of Great Salt Lake, the lake today is mostly gone. 2/3 of its water, more than half of its area is gone. That is not because of data centers. Right? That's because of legacy water use, agricultural and residential. That's what's driving the decline of the lake. So it's really good to start with that. Data centers are new, right? And it's a novel threat, and our mind goes toward, okay, this is what's causing the current crisis that we're seeing. The reason why I say this is potentially different, when I first heard about this project, by the way, not very many weeks ago, like most of us, not very many days ago, I thought, okay, it's just another data center. The rhetoric's overheated, the concern is overblown. Let's keep our eye on the prize, that is reducing agricultural and residential water use. That's how we're going to restore the lake. And then somebody said 9 gigawatts. And all of a sudden, when they're saying, the claims of the proponents of the project are, not only is this going to use very little water, it's going to produce water for Great Salt Lake, right, through this alum cycle, which is a real thing. You can burn natural gas in a way that does produce water. Granted, this is 400 times larger than the largest facility doing that anywhere in the world, but it is possible, right? That's when it connected, right? If you think about the impacts on the lake, there are 3 main categories. One of them is this could use a lot of water. Again, the project is claiming that it will use very little. If you look at data centers around the country, they typically use between 2 and 20 times more water than they announced beforehand. Right? That's just the data. Right? So we should take the claims with a grain of salt, not saying that they are in bad faith, but the data have proven out that typically these use more water than they think. The biggest use of water for a data center usually is not cooling of the servers. It's to produce the power to fuel the servers. Right? And here they're again claiming they're going to use a new technology, a dry-cooled gas plant at this scale, using the alum cycle, to do this with very little water or even negative water. And I'm not going to come down, as a scientist, we wait to see the data. But as a Utahn, as a person, as a human being, we should be exercising the precautionary principle. And the burden of proof is on the person proposing to make the change. Right? And so for me, as a concerned citizen, that's what I want to see. Right? We need to make sure, is it actually going to use the amount of water that they're claiming? The second impact is the thermal impact of this project, potentially. Because you kind of have 2 pathways. You can either use a lot of water to cool the thing, or you can dump a lot of heat into the atmosphere. And typically, for a data center, the heat load is not enormous. But then you add that 9 gigawatts onto it. And all of a sudden, you're talking about major changes to, of course, the climate in Hansel Valley, but also potentially regional weather patterns. And that's where all of a sudden this can affect the wildlife of Great Salt Lake, the hydrology of Great Salt Lake, some of the most important remaining wetlands around the lake. And then the third impact is how does the 41,000 acres is an area a little bit bigger than Bryce Canyon National Park. It's about half the size of Utah Lake. I know probably nobody here has ever been to Utah Valley, but if you go south, there's a freshwater lake called Utah Lake. It's one of the largest in the western United States. And that amount of land use affects a lot of things, from the migration of wildlife to light pollution to heat pollution that can affect people that live there, wildlife, and ultimately our ability to save the lake. So are data centers incompatible with restoring Great Salt Lake? No. Are mega projects, but if we develop these kinds of mega projects without those environmental protections in place, the unintended consequences could be enormous for the people, wildlife, and ultimately our way of life.
Thank you, Ben. So, Josh, let's turn to the energy piece of this. Help us understand the energy demands for a facility of this scale, the environmental impacts of that, and also the implications of the fact that it is, according to the planners of this project, supposed to be powered by a natural gas pipeline.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's great to be part of this panel. So Josh Kraft, I am the Director of Government Relations for Utah Clean Energy. We are a 25-year-old nonprofit organization working in the building energy efficiency, renewable energy, and electric vehicle space, and someone who's cared and worked deeply on creating solutions and common ground on climate for a long time. And I gotta say, I kind of miss when it was boring to talk about energy. And the perspective here, a lot of the work that I do ends up being, it's government work, and we're talking and fighting about projects on the scale of like 100 megawatts or 200 megawatts of solar and wind. Should it go in this location? Or whether or not we should pay people a little bit more to do rooftop solar. And so the scale of this project, to what Ben was just saying, and I think all of you are aware, it's just truly massive. It's pretty hard to put this in context. If you'd have told me 2 years ago that someone was going to propose a 9 gigawatt data center, I would have said that's crazy. That's not going to happen. And so the 9 gigawatts, I'll just sort of say what we know and what we don't know, because obviously we don't know a lot. But 9 gigawatts of gas is 9 gigawatts is more than Utah's total peak energy electricity use in a given year for all our utilities. That's Rocky Mountain Power, that's our rural co-ops, that's our municipal utilities. A state representative mentioned that compared this to the Nucor steel facility, which is actually pretty close, one of the bigger facilities in Box Elder County and is one of Rocky Mountain Power's largest customers. That facility is 90 megawatts. So this is 100 times that size. The amount of gas, if just using the Ruby pipeline, that it would require, we're still trying to kind of get our handle on what it would take, but it seems like it would use the entire output of that Ruby pipeline. So it's hard to fathom how large and the energy demands of this project are and would be. Now, I will say this is supposed to not be on the electricity grid, and given what they're asking for, I'm sure that is true. Utah law, per a law from 2 years ago called SB 132, allows that. But I don't think a project of this size was contemplated. But it does mean, for better, the good thing about that, I will say, is it means that Utah customers don't have to pay directly for the facilities or any transmission upgrades. The bad thing is that the traditional tools that we would look to within the electricity process through our State Public Service Commission, which regulates our utilities, doesn't have the same level of tools. They don't really have any oversight. And so that's an important piece as we're moving forward to understand and to take notice of. It's not the PSC's fault. That's the way that the law is currently structured. But the last thing that's really important is we don't know the type of gas-fired power plant that they're planning to use. Ben was talking about something using the alum cycle. The most common type of power plant would be a combined cycle natural gas plant. Those are the most efficient and the least polluting of gas plants. They're the most common. Even if this facility at this scale were to use that, it would double the state's CO2 emissions at roughly 30 million tons a year. So it would be a huge impact on our climate goals. And frankly nationally at that scale. But the reality is, because of the demand for and interest in these facilities, you can't get a combined cycle gas plant for 5 to 7 years today. So a lot of folks, including some other data center developers, are trying to return to reciprocating gas engines. These are very relatively small units that would folks are, again, they're turning to because the other technology isn't available, but they're much, much dirtier. Our initial analysis is that they would emit about 12,000 tons of nitrous oxides per year, and so it's a huge amount of emissions. So I'll just start there. That's what we know, we don't know, and I look forward to the rest of the discussion.
So, Brenna, you are the lead sponsor on this citizens referendum. You've lived in Box Elder County your whole life, is that correct?
No, just 20 years.
20 years in Box Elder County. What made you want to be a part of this referendum, and what were the problems that you saw with the project in terms of affecting the people in your community?
Well, I got involved with this because, well, I knew I was going to do this the minute they said they were going to vote, and I knew they were going to vote yes. So I told several people that we would just have to referendum it. That night, somebody got on Facebook and started complaining, and we had a major vent session. And by morning, we had 5 people ready to sponsor the referendum. So that's kind of where we started. Now we have 2,500 volunteers. It's a week and a half later. I saw a lot of problems with this. I saw the water problems, which are apparently honestly, very apparent. Got really mad when Kevin O'Leary said that they weren't taking any water from the Great Salt Lake. And he's an environmental scientist, so he should know that the water table, if you take water out of the water table, it's going to affect the Great Salt Lake. But especially where you're taking it from water that's going to flow into the Great Salt Lake. So that kind of upset me. And then the heat dome and the fact that the closed loop system that they say is not going to use any water, well, it's going to pollute the water, it's going to heat the water up, then it's going to put it back into the ecosystem that's not used to this hot, sludgy water. And so that was a concern, especially with the bird refuge there. And that was a major concern to me. I'm afraid we're going to lose it. Then I was concerned about the air. That was my next concern because of the inversions that we already have. And we're talking about putting all this smog into the air, and the inversions already come up and affect us. And on red burn days, my grandchildren already with asthma have great deals of difficulty. And I just didn't want to see us increasing that anymore. And then I started researching areas that have data centers and what the effects were. I looked at all the health problems that are happening and the effects on the animals in the area and the noise pollution and the dark skies and the vibrations and everything. It's going to affect the animals out there. It's going to affect our bees. It's going to affect our birds. It's going to affect the wildlife. It's going to affect the cows. So that upset me too. And so I had like 15 reasons why we shouldn't do this. And I think it's crazy that we're even considering it. So those are kind of where I started.
Well, thank you so much, Brendan. Thank you for being here with us this evening. Brig, there are a lot of legal intricacies to this issue, obviously. We wouldn't expect one person to explain them all in one evening. But can you kind of give us a little bit of an overview about how the law might affect the decisions that are made about this project moving forward?
Yeah, thank you. And Brenda, thank you. The one thing I really want to underline here, for all of us who are Salt Lake Cityers or Utah County folks or whatever, Brenna is dealing with somebody going right at her home. And I think that we need to understand how, I know a lot of people feel outraged sitting miles away, but just the strength and the poise that you have after the threats your community's faced, I really admire you a lot. So let me just kind of give a really short answer here. For a law professor, that's going to be the next 2 or 3 hours. I hope. Get comfortable. So here's the basic gist. The best tool in the toolbox is the one that Brenna picked up. If we can get a referendum, and it's going to take the 5 signatures, it's going to take a positive review of the county or a lawsuit that's going to follow that, and then it's going to take a whole bunch of signatures. I mean, there's a whole bunch of ifs. But that is the way to actually, that is probably the most powerful tool. That is the most powerful tool in the toolbox. The right to referendum a decision, it's a constitutional right. It's embedded in the Utah Constitution, and it basically stands for the principle that when your elected officials do not do a good job representing you, you can turn the clock back. And that's what they're trying to do out there. So I just have to say that is the best tool. Now, there are a lot of other tools out there. If this project goes forward, we're going to have Clean Air Act permits. We're going to have, probably Clean Water Act permits. There's going to be all sorts of possible ways to kind of challenge here and there. But this is really the lodestar. There's also a set of tools that you might have that says, hey, we had a little problem with process. And the problem here was there weren't any. If you think about what actually happened, we heard whispers of this happening, and then all of a sudden an approval. And it was a major decision. And you might want to turn that clock back. And there are a bunch of tools that you could go back and say, we want a do-over on that decision. Not a veto like the referendum would do, but a do-over, and that's a possible set of tools. The last thing I would just want to say is don't wait for a lawyer to give you permission to actually do something, right? What I will say to you is I have heard from folks that are more acquainted with the project than I am, because we haven't actually seen any information that, you've mischaracterized the project. I would say to you, you have not mischaracterized the project. You don't actually know what the project is. But we have seen that kind of shifting of what the project actually is, and it isn't because of people like me, it's because of people like you, and particularly you. So what I would just say is there are a bunch of different ways that you can get involved formally, but if you really want to make a difference, the thing that has seemed to make the most difference is that people are upset and they're expressing it somehow. Keep talking.
Thank you, Brig. In that spirit, we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. We have Sam and Peter here who are going to be walking around with microphones. Please raise your hand if you have a question. They'll bring a mic around, and we'll have our panelists respond.
Wow, first one, okay. So I think, and this is me trying to figure out what exactly goes into the decision making here, and the fact that it happens so quickly and there's a lot of information or lack thereof online. What I don't quite understand is it seems like the state of Utah as a governing body has some level of say in this, but I don't understand the level of say that is, or if I'm wrong on that, and it is entirely in the hands of Box Elder County because that's where it is. Because I know that it plays into the military-related data center laws and all of this stuff that's happening with the administration that is requiring states to move forward with stuff like this, but it still had to go to vote on the county level. So I guess my question is, on the state level, what kind of control is there, and how much can we bother, how much pressure on state decision makers? And I know that the thing that they were trying to demand was that there would be more state looking into all of these questions about it before it even went to the approval process. But yeah, I'm just having a hard time understanding all of that.
I think where you're going. If I can start out with this one, is that okay? So there is an enactment called, I had to pull it up here to make sure I got the Military Installation Development Authority. And basically, this is a state act that basically says, we will take, if a county or a city or a government jurisdiction basically wants to give an entity, an authority, some of its powers, and that could be its taxing powers, its land use powers, it can do so. And in that case, then this quasi-state agency that's created will then be the governing board of whatever those decisions were that were delegated, right? And so a lot of the land use power and some of the taxing authorities, I understand it, have been maybe delegated out. And so, you know, this decision, which was, we don't really know a lot about what the different phases of the project are. What they're basically trying to say is this will be governed by the MIDA board and not Box Elder County here on after. Now, there might be some things where they cooperate or some things where Box Elder County keeps some decision-making authority, and then it will stick with the county. So it's going to be a decision-making process that will involve this state entity, and it will involve Box Elder County, but a lot of the most important decisions are going to be made by the entity. One thing about this enactment, just so that you can kind of get a sense of it, what is basically happening here is that this isn't just a Utah thing, but across the entire country, more and more private commercial entities are entering our military bases, and they're helping our military out in different ways. And so what has basically happened is our state, as well as many other states, have basically said, we're going to create this quasi kind of government entity so that if there is a private entity that is basically working hand in hand with the government, that they'll have a little bit more autonomy. Yeah, and so this is when you hear about the MIDA board, this is kind of what they're talking about, is this very specific part of state government. So it is confusing. If you haven't heard of it, it's not surprising. I hadn't heard of it. And I spend a lot of time poring over statutes and doing other things that would make you want to gouge your eyes out. So it isn't super surprising that you don't know about it, but that's where it's coming from.
If this referendum does go through, and just what you described about MIDA, like I heard some of that conversation, and I was at the Box Elder County meeting, where they said, hey, if we don't vote on this, then we have no say in the matter. And if this referendum goes through, does that just cut them out of the conversation and MIDA still runs with it? Like, does it do anything to control what MIDA's trying to control, which is no regulations and we're going to do whatever we want with the land? Like, is there any?
Yeah. So you were one of the people that were paid in from out of state to come to that
Yes,
meeting?
yes. I did say, I didn't see a bus there.
Yeah, okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed your travels here, and welcome to our state. But what I'll say about this is what the referendum is trying to do is it's not just go back and try it again, it's no. That's what a referendum is. It's we are voting not to do that, right? It would have been as if the county commissioners voted no that night. So
Some of them said
that
they
doesn't
would've
mean that
voted
we
no.
won't see another version of this or anything else, but that's what they're trying to do, and that's why it's so important, is it basically takes us back to the very beginning.
What about a state referendum?
I don't mean to be such a microphone.
You're the legal expert.
Okay, so
At this point, it is a legal.
When we talk about a referendum is a response to a decision that was made. What you're actually talking about is an initiative process. So you might feel like it's not just Hansel Valley that needs to worry about that. Maybe we all need to worry about that. Maybe the state, maybe we want a different law that says, if you want to build a data center in our backyards, come and get our permission first as voters. Like, I don't know what you want, but you might want some other entity. If you're going to do something like that, this is a new law, you would want to start the state initiative process. And what that would require is not just signatures in Box Elder County. That would require signatures all over the state. And I'm not an expert in this area of law, but to my understanding, I do not think you could get on the ballot before 2028. I think the next major election. But that's neither here nor there. I might be wrong about that, but that would be a different thing. And I don't think that we get to go back and veto that decision with that law. That would just be going forward, that's how it should be.
Thank you.
I have two questions. One, is MIDA elected by the people? And two, I heard that there were 5 out of 7, I believe, of the MIDA board were real estate investors. So isn't that a conflict of interest? Or am I really naive?
I'm an ecologist, so let me take this one. MIDA is not elected. It's wait, was there somebody that wanted to take it?
I was saying you should let the real estate people take it if it's a real estate.
Oh yeah, right. So MIDA is not elected, they're appointed. One of the conflicts of interest, even deeper than their profession, is it kind of muddies the water between the separation of powers in state government. And so one of the interesting questions is, look, MIDA exists for fast-tracking big projects just like this. That is the reason it exists. And so we, the people, one of the things that we could do as an entire state is saying, how do we want to modify that tool, right? Is it serving us? I used to think that we had to have the right policy in place to win. Now I think policy is inadequate. Policy is not enough. We have to make sure that the right people are in charge. And we have to strengthen that link, right, between we, the people, and those who are making the decisions. And so there's an opportunity through a ballot initiative. There's also an opportunity for any of our representatives and senators to change the law, right? That is why we elect them. And that is why it has been amazing to see in just a matter of days the narrative change, right, from the governor on down. Our elected officials saying, whoa, the people are awake. We are on notice, right? And it is working. So keep the constructive but firm messages flowing, right? How are we going to make sure this doesn't happen again? How are we going to make sure that the project doesn't have all of these negative impacts? How are we going to make sure that the project even accomplishes its stated goals, right? That is what our elected officials are there for. And I heard from a former state representative, do you know what our elected officials love more than money? They love something more than money. Votes. That's how they get there, and they are actually responsive to this. So if you don't have to shout, you don't even have to rally. We have to make sure that they know they're not going to get reelected, right, if they're not addressing these kinds of issues. That applies to Great Salt Lake, and it applies to data centers.
I believe you mentioned something about if the referendum is successful, like possibility of a lawsuit. Is that something that's contemplated, or is that only if and as necessary?
I would be very surprised, and I am just speaking, it's not like I have a Colonel Sanders recipe or anything. I don't have any secrets here that I can share with you, but I would be very surprised if we don't see a lawsuit almost no matter what happens. I would be very surprised. But it wouldn't be, I think that the most likely kind of lawsuit kind of point where this would probably happen is the Box Elder County will make a determination whether or not that this whether or not this question could be put to referendum. And it's a kind of a complicated question, but basically what they're asking here in some ways is a few things. One is, was a decision made? Two, if the decision was made, was it more like an administrative decision or was it more like a legislative decision? One of the weird things about, we have separation of powers within the state that it's pretty easy to tell when the legislature acts. The county commission, they do both jobs. They do administrative work and they do legislative work. And so one of the questions that we were going to ask is what kind of power were they using? And I know this is that's going to be what the question turns on, if it would be my guess. But I would be very surprised, almost no matter what happens with that, if there isn't some form of litigation. Whether that's brought by the developer or the state, if the answer is yes, you can take it to referendum, or whether it's brought by the folks getting the referendum themselves, and it's kind of a longer story here. But I think I'd be very surprised if we don't see some sort of lawsuit at that point.
Okay, and so would Bear might know, like the Bear folks might have that sort of in the chamber?
And I would just ask, rather than put Brenna on the spot,
or restate the question. Brenna didn't.
Yeah,
hear.
I just kind of wonder whether or not they might want to keep that to themselves, kind of what they're thinking right now, because I kind of imagine this is going to be seen by a wide audience.
We're not going away regardless of what they decide.
So I just wanted to go back to your point about voting, because I've been an elected official, and I know how hard it is to get rid of some of those elected officials in state government. However, 4 of the 6 voting members on MIDA are elected officials. So if we focus on 4 people versus the whole legislature, we might see significant change in what happens in this particular project. Yeah, the 4 people are Utah Senate President Stuart Adams, State Senator Jerry Stevenson, Weber County Commissioner Gage Furr, and Clearfield Mayor Mark Shepard. Those 4 people need to feel the pressure.
So what I'd say was, this information, ways to engage, that's going to be shared, right? Connect with Grow the Flow, connect with Bear, and when you're facing a major threat, do you know what the most important thing you can do as an individual is? Don't act as an individual, right? I mean, take Brenda's example. You get organized, and all of a sudden you move from 5 to 2,500. So please sign up for Grow the Flow.
Can you explain what HB 60 is and how that affects what's happening right now?
Oh boy.
I didn't expect HB 60 to be this relevant this quickly. You know, here we are.
Yeah, it's okay. I got you. HB 60 was a law that was passed this past session that basically modified something called the public interest prong in water law. So when you're actually given a water law permit, you go through an analysis, and one of the things that you might want to consider is the public welfare, right? It's a very long story, but I'll just note it. The way that this came about, this is a unique part of water law that has been brought to the entire western United States, and it's sort of the remnants of the Mormon doctrine of stewardship, when water that was spread out all over this area was governed, but not by our state courts or federal courts, but by church courts. But this idea of this public welfare doctrine, what HB 60 basically says is there are 3 different times we're not going to consider welfare generally anymore. What we're going to consider is whether or not welfare impacts water quality, water quantity, or some other area that the state deems important, and we don't actually know how it would actually deem it important. But I'm ad-libbing here. I haven't looked at the language of the bill for a few months. But that's the basic gist of it. And so what I would say is this kind of comes up in the context of water transfers. So the data center, if you're going to need water, you're probably going to have a water transfer request. And when the state engineer goes through the process of figuring out whether or not to transfer that water. She will be tied to or limited to thinking about the public welfare through this more narrow view. The broader view of is it good for society isn't the question anymore. The question is, think about what the state engineer is supposed to be doing. Her job is to determine who has water rights. So think about water, water quality, water quantity, and then maybe some other stuff. And I do think it will probably limit the kinds of arguments that the state engineer would consider pretty drastically. A lot of the things that we've heard about, including the idea that this is going to change the nature and character of an area, that it might cause air quality impacts, those things aren't as relevant anymore. The things that would be relevant would be more likely things that focus on water quality and water quantity.
I want to just quickly say that, not to add about HB 60, but I do a lot of work in the legislative session. I do a lot of work, and that's sort of my bread and butter. And I would just say that it's important to know, we've all had to come up to speed on data centers. We're still reviewing our policy and what exactly it's going to be towards data centers in general. But I would just encourage everyone, and sorry to sound a bit preachy, don't get lost in the details of all of these laws and these actions. Brenna is here, and thank you, to push for what is the public interest, because the public clearly has an interest in the facility of this size and this scale. And I will say that and so if there are public comment periods, and there will be around air quality, around and water quality, others, do participate in those, but don't be limited to like some of the narrow arguments that are being made in here, as you won't be. I just want to get up to speed, but don't worry about getting too far into the details. This is clearly, it's going to have an impact on us. It's going to have an impact on you, and your concern is the correct thing to continue to express.
Well, and if I could reiterate that, one of the sponsors of HB 60 reached out just days after this blew up and said, maybe we need to change HB 60, right? So that shows that we shouldn't be thinking about what is the right policy in place. We need to make sure that our voice is being heard, and that means we get organized. What's happening here tonight is part of the solution.
And I just kind of underline what I was saying before. Although it's interesting to know what the law is, you don't need a lawyer's permission, right? Like, the thing that your public officials want to hear isn't, well, it's actually water quality, water quantity. Let me talk to you. That's not what's going to bend them. What's going to bend them is, this is really meaningful to me, and here's why.
Quick question on the referendum. Is that only restricted to Box Elder County, or can those of us who live outside of there help? And if so, how?
Well, the people that need to sign the referendum, we need 5,422 registered voters in Box Elder County. We need 16% of each district, and there's 4 districts. But you can help. You can come out and help us gather signatures. We have a lot of people from out of the county. So come on up. There's a form on the Box Elder Accountability Referendum Facebook page. You can fill it out. It's a vetting form, and we will get back with you. Well, they've got 20 days to decide whether we can do it, and then we've got 45 days from that point to get the signatures.
Could Grow the Flow make sure that, I think a lot of people are trying to make sure that they can track that down. Is there a way that you can provide a link to folks?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. We will link to the efforts, support that.
Sort of a slightly different question, but similar. From a public health and environmental perspective, what third-party organizations or companies are doing current studies on the environmental and the public health impacts of this?
The short answer is no one.
Why not?
Yeah, so because it's come up so quickly and because some of the provisions for how MIDA can fast track this, we're in kind of a reactionary phase. If there is a Clean Air Act violation, then something could be triggered. And I think that we need to change that narrative. So a bunch of scientists, engineers have reached out and said, what about the tectonic stability of the place, right? What about the air quality? What about the thermal impacts? And right now it's just a ragtag team of volunteers doing that. That's no way to run a rodeo. When you're talking about doubling or tripling the electrical production of an entire state. And that gets back to this process problem. There has not yet been a process, and that's why we're here tonight, to ensure that that process begins.
Hello, thanks for being here. I'm Amy Jones. I also ran for mayor in Layton. I was just wondering if we could propose, I lost, but if we could propose something like the electric windmills, or like something better instead of this, or like, well, if that could be like on the table, or if it's like totally, like, just, that's my question.
I'll take that and say that it was good to see that as a result of public pressure and public discussion that Mr. O'Leary was talking about modifying what might be used to power the facility. I think a 9 gigawatt gas-only facility is just a profoundly expensive and uncreative decision and type of, but I will, and I think that there is opportunities for us to, and certainly we are starting to have some of those conversations about when we do data centers, how we might explore, cleaner, more emitting alternatives. I mean, these are, if we're talking about actual hyperscalers who are actually interested in this project, and we're still figuring that out, then they're very deep pockets. And I will say, for a facility of this size, I'm not sure that we would just be like, we would not be like, yes, this is amazing because it has solar panels rather than gas. It is a very large facility, and so that's, just to note. I think, but there are other folks, including some other folks I know in Utah County, who have been trying to develop projects in that area that have been stymied and had a lot of problems. And so there are folks, I think, who are doing smaller data centers with empowering them with other alternatives. I will say, folks who want right now they want to run data centers 24/7. And so having that power access and interruptible power is really important to the folks. That doesn't mean it's all that they should be granted in all circumstances. It's just that's generally been what's been requested.
Hi, Brenda. First of all, thank you for all you're doing up there. I'm in Davis County, but we see you and we appreciate you. First of all, thank you. In my heart, I want to believe that we're going to pass, we're going to be successful, but how do we move forward with responsible technology going forward? Is there already a nonprofit organization in place? Do we need to develop one? Is there a place where we can easily separate the facts from the fear, so that we can be more proactive, essentially? If not, can we get started on one? I'm happy to volunteer.
It's such a good question, and you're acknowledging the world is changing, right? And if we simply say nothing can be built anywhere, right, that doesn't work either. We want to be making good decisions. We want to be separating the facts from the myths and the fears. And I think that we should recognize that there has been some bad behavior, right, by people who are making threats, who are doing things that are contrary to our base values. I got a text message earlier today, I told some of you, that said, why hasn't the sheriff arrested the county commissioners, right? And I said, well, I'm glad that they haven't, right? This is America. That's not how we do things. And so establishing that process would be really good. There's a group called the Union of Concerned Scientists. That's a really, really good resource, nonpartisan information. Doesn't have a connection with any of the developers. They provide very balanced information. But that's another service that we're trying to provide at Grow the Flow, right? So this data center, does it mean that immediately the lake boils and evaporates? No, it doesn't, right? Even if it were built and moved forward, we're going to do all that we can to make sure that we have a good outcome. But I'd love to talk afterwards for other ideas.
Can I just add, nationally there's a group called the Lincoln Institute land, and they have a lot of resources that I think would be relevant to folks who want to think about data centers. And I also just want to give a real shout out to Utah Clean Energy. If you saw what they're doing quite a bit of work trying to translate a lot of the complex aspects of what's going on into plain English. And as somebody who's not a scientist, I appreciated it.
Thanks, Brett. But I will say that there is a responsibility that you're sharing of how do we tap into some national networks on this question, and we're getting up speed. I wish, now it'd be nice to have done it a couple weeks ago. But it's Utah is kind of the Wild West in that we are one of the few states that it's enabled these off-grid data centers, and I don't think the scale. We just didn't contemplate something of this scale, and it's going to take now we're in gear.
So I have a question about the county commission. I think I had read that Commissioner Lee Perry defended their decision, saying this really comes down to a property rights decision. And Box Elder County is a pretty conservative county, pretty pro-property rights. But then you look at the tax breaks, the tax differential, the public infrastructure. Just wonder if anyone can respond to this idea of property rights versus the need to have public support and tax breaks.
Just, the idea of property rights here being the basis of the decision is interesting to me. I mean, one of the things that I have been very focused on as I work on Great Salt Lake is trying to make sure that our neighbors to the north, particularly in farming communities, that if we're going to need water and we're going to have to reduce the amount of water that farmers or ranchers get, that those folks, when they put their farms together whenever they got their water rights, this was never anticipated as a problem. I've always felt like it isn't, to me anyway, I feel strongly that compensating people for the rights that they have is important. And I think property rights are very important myself. I certainly would be upset if somebody implicated my rights in any way, as simple or meager as they are. So I just kind of want to underline that I'm not trying to throw property rights under the bus, but it does seem to me a little backward that, we have spent so much time trying to figure out how to win trust, build ties, try to help people understand that we're not there to rob them of their rights. But, I just think about what about all the rights of the people who are going to be affected. There are people who are next door neighbors to this thing who also call this place home. And the whole point of property rights, it's not a fact. It's not like I have a right. It's an assertion. And when I hear Brenda talk about all the things that she cares about, she's telling us why her rights also matter. And I just think that, if you are ever finding yourself in that property rights is the end of the discussion, I mean, you haven't obviously had as neighbors as annoying as me. At some point, your neighbor's rights becomes a detriment to others, and you need to figure out a way to balance those rights. And I feel like that is a big part of what was missing here.
You brought up the tax capture that's involved. And part of, when Lee said that, it kind of frustrated me because I thought, if we own property, we have the responsibility for paying taxes on that property. And for 30 years, the state government has given them major tax breaks. They only have to pay 20% of property taxes, and that's stealing from our schools and our children. And those are... We need the infrastructure to pay for all these people coming in, and all that risk is going to fall to the county residents. And then they gave 92% of a tax break on energy use credits or energy use tax. Why? And then they said, no, you don't have to pay any personal property tax for 30 years. And we don't even know what else is going out there besides the power plant and the data center. It's 40,000 acres. What are they doing with it? It's a big question. So part of personal property is, yeah, you have to pay for it. You are a citizen of the county. You need to pay your way.
I'd like to reiterate what, Brenna, one of your points here. Where is the risk and where is the profit? And one of the patterns with these mega projects in the US and elsewhere is the profits tend to be privatized and the risk tends to be put on the public, right? And this is what we saw just a few years ago. Does anybody remember when we wanted to build islands on Utah Lake? Right.
Are you familiar with that?
I heard about the project.
Oh, did you? Okay. Well, that's good to hear.
And we should have
sued for $3 million.
That was a project half the size, 20,000 acres, and they came in and they said it's going to solve all of the state's problems. It looked like it was too late to make any difference, right? The legislators had already changed the law and made a carve-out in Utah's constitution. They were claiming that they had billions of dollars of investments from international sources. It was unstoppable, right? And what we saw was over a period of just a few months, things that we thought were big blows, right? When it got approved, when the financing was coming in, when a major lawsuit was levied, those turned out to be missteps that gave us an opportunity to turn the program around. So when I saw those county commissioners say, we're not going to take public comment, you should have expressed these concerns earlier. You should have known, on point 17 in the agenda, that they are trying to chart a very narrow legal course to say that we don't have a say. And ultimately that works against them, right? The Utah way is not being polite, it's participating in good faith. And when we see people not acting in good faith and putting our communities at risk, our values, our communal commitments, right? We have promised to be the first community anywhere in the world to restore our inland sea, right? By restoring Great Salt Lake. And so, Brenna, what you said, it doesn't matter how many setbacks are going to happen, we are not leaving.
We have the microphone out right here. This is unfortunately going to have to be the last question of the evening. I want to be respectful of the library's time and the amount of time we had the room for. So this will be the last question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you guys for being here. Can you speak a little bit more about the heat dome? There was some statistics I saw about the projected nighttime and daytime temperatures, and they were incredibly alarming. So I'm curious if there is, based on how the energy is and how it's built, is that a range, and how dire is that, and would that destroy agriculture and life as we know it if the nighttime temperatures are 28 degrees higher than they are on average? That's what I heard.
So these estimates come from Rob Davies. And to the earlier question, where is the independent team evaluating these claims? The answer is a volunteer professor at Utah State who is familiar with atmospheric circulation said, I did some back-of-the-envelope calculations. That's the current state of the art. So if Rob's calculations are right, that the nighttime temperature range is between 8 and 28 degrees hotter than it is today, that's the difference between northern Utah and the Sahara Desert. And so you bet it affects everything from the amount of rain that falls, the dew point, to the wildlife that's there, and even the circulation of the atmosphere and precipitation far downwind.
Addison, as a professor, it breaks my heart that we have people that have questions that I haven't been able to ask them. I'm used to staring at rooms where people are saying, make it stop. Can we just have a couple of you yell out your questions and we'll just take popcorn quickly?
Yes. Just a quick one. Since it's Box Elder County that's going to be voting on this, does anybody have a rough idea of how the people of Box Elder County feel?
Okay, that's one question. Up there in the top.
Can you talk about who's going to profit, who's poised to make money on this project locally and outside?
Okay, one more. Who is it?
You can say big government without saying big government.
I didn't hear that one.
Why do we need this?
say bigger government.
Okay,
Have you looked into other MIDA projects?
okay.
Everyone needs to vote in the midterm elections and the primaries. Stuart Adams is up for election. He's being challenged.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry, we're gonna have to, in the rapid fire questions, anybody want to take a shot at any of those?
So we did some analysis. The community that filed the most protests per capita to the water right, Box Elder County. So it's homegrown opposition, right? We need better polling, and ultimately it's the number of signatures, right, that will tell the story.
You have to keep in mind that was $15 for each time that somebody filed a complaint to get that hearing that didn't exist. But
Could I just say, in Utah, we will drive 45 minutes for $2 off a hamburger. And these guys just stole $15 from 4,000 Utahns, right? So thinking again about the long-term strategy, it's mobilizing.
And they can't even tell us what they're going to do with that $60,000 they got.
Yeah.
It doesn't
It's
exist
lovely.
anymore.
Yeah, great question. Are there action items? Where can we show up next? We took, when you RSVP'd for this event, the question that came up the most was, what can we do? Right? Like, it's really, really exciting. And what I'll say is, there are many, many groups that are leading out on this. The people of Box Elder County, as Brigham mentioned, are the most important to support right now, right? Grow the Flow is acting as a source of information, kind of a clearinghouse, but we are certainly not the only one. But we will share links to places that people can go. If you have ideas, there's apparently a Signal chat that is just exploding. Every 30 seconds there's a new message, right? I'm not on it, but if you have ideas of resources that we can share, please reach out, send those to info@growtheflowutah.org, and then we will share them around. And so tomorrow at 11 o'clock, 10:30 at the Capitol, there'll be a press release. Again, we'll hear from the people of Box Elder County and this amazing coalition that's risen up.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. Thank you to our panelists. And as they said, this event is over, but the conversation continues, so stay engaged.